There are some things in this world that seem permanent, like the bond between a father and his daughter, like the image of a family frozen in time, smiling for cameras, waving from red carpets, giving the world exactly what it wants to see. And then quietly, without warning, that image shatters. Suri Cruise just turned 18, and in the days that followed, she did something so quietly powerful, so deeply personal, that it stopped people mid-scroll. She didn't make a speech. She didn't post a dramatic video. She simply changed her name, and in doing so, she said everything she had refused to say for years. But to understand why that moment hit the way it did, you have to go back. All the way back to the beginning. Because this story didn't start with Suri. It started with two people who made the world believe in something that was never quite real. Tom Cruise was already a legend by the time Katie Holmes entered his life. He was the man who ran toward danger for sport, who smiled at the camera like he had never experienced a single moment of doubt, who built an image so carefully constructed it could withstand almost anything. Almost. Katie Holmes, on the other hand, was something different entirely. She was the girl next door who had grown up on television screens, who had played the lovable, relatable Joey Potter for years, and who had carried with her a kind of sweetness that felt genuinely unguarded. She had once, as a teenager, admitted in an interview with 17 magazine that Tom Cruise was her dream man. She had said it the way teenage girls say things, openly and without embarrassment, never imagining for a second that the universe was actually listening. But the universe, it turned out, had a strange sense of humor. Their relationship launched in 2005 and immediately felt like something constructed rather than discovered. There were no quiet early dates, no slow reveal to the public, no gentle easing into a shared life. Within weeks of being linked together, they were everywhere. And the story of how they found each other has always carried an uncomfortable undercurrent that most people chose to ignore at the time. Tom Cruise's previous relationships had not ended quietly. His marriage to Mimi Rogers and later to Nicole Kidman had both dissolved in ways that people connected, at least in part, to his devoted involvement with the Church of Scientology. Former members of the organization, those who left and later spoke out, described a process by which women were sometimes evaluated as potential partners for high-ranking members. Actresses were reportedly approached, screened, assessed for compatibility not just with the man, but with the institution surrounding him. Scarlett Johansson later denied being involved in any such process, calling the very idea insulting. Sofia Vergara was also named in reports. An Iranian-born actress named Nazanin Boniadi was said to have been brought into a relationship through a process involving constant monitoring, restrictions on her personal freedom, and eventual silent dismissal when things did not work out. She never publicly confirmed many of the details, but her silence itself told a certain kind of story. Into this world stepped Katie Holmes. Young, beautiful, eager to love someone who seemed larger than life. She had grown up Catholic in Toledo, Ohio, the daughter of a lawyer named Martin Holmes, who was, by all accounts, both protective and practical. Her father had concerns from the very start, not just about the age gap or the celebrity, but about something harder to name. Something about the way this relationship had appeared so fully formed, so immediately intense, without any of the organic uncertainty that real love tends to carry. But the world was not thinking about any of that on the afternoon Tom Cruise appeared on Oprah Winfrey's couch. That moment became one of the most replayed clips in early internet history. He bounced. He shouted. He ran off stage and came back with Katie, beaming, almost vibrating with something that was very loud and very hard to look away from. The audience screamed. Oprah laughed. And somewhere behind all the noise, nobody stopped to ask whether joy that performed that aggressively was actually joy at all. The engagement followed at the top of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The ring was a 5-carat yellow diamond. The pregnancy announcement came not long after. And then came the details of that pregnancy that made even the most charitable observers pause. Tom Cruise had purchased his own ultrasound machine. He wanted to monitor the baby's development from home. Medical professionals responded to this news with barely concealed alarm, noting that ultrasound equipment is not a consumer toy, that it requires trained operators, and that using it repeatedly without clinical supervision is not the loving gesture it was framed as. The machine was eventually going to be donated to a hospital, he said. But in the meantime, it sat in their home, a piece of medical equipment, a way of being present that felt, to outside eyes, more like oversight than tenderness. The birth itself arrived on April 18, 2006, and the circumstances surrounding it became the detail that people returned to again and again when they tried to make sense of what life inside that relationship must have actually been like. Katie Holmes gave birth in silence. This was not a personal preference she had arrived at on her own. It was a practice rooted in Scientology, inspired by the writings of the church's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, who believed that sounds and words spoken during childbirth could be psychologically damaging to the infant. So in one of the most physically overwhelming experiences a human body can undergo, Katie Holmes was expected to be quiet, to endure without expressing, to suppress the most natural, involuntary sounds of pain in service of a belief system she had adopted only after meeting the man she was about to marry. The world read these details, and many of them shrugged. Celebrity couples do strange things. That was the consensus. Move on. The wedding in November 2006 was held at a castle in Italy and cost an estimated $3.5 million. Katie wore 2 gowns by Giorgio Armani. Suri, just months old, had a matching Armani outfit. Actress Leah Remini, then still a committed Scientologist and a guest at the wedding, later described the wait before Katie appeared as almost unbearably long. Tom stood at the front and smiled. The vows, reportedly influenced by Scientology tradition, included Tom promising things like girls need clothes and food, tender happiness and frills. Strange words. Words that sounded less like vows and more like a checklist. But there was laughter and dancing and champagne. And the pictures were beautiful. And for a while it was enough. The years that followed were quieter on the surface and louder underneath. People who spent time around Katie began to notice something they struggled to articulate at first. She seemed to be disappearing. Not physically, but in some essential way. She appeared at events and said the right things and smiled for photographs, and called Tom amazing with a kind of practiced fluency that stopped sounding sincere after the first 100 repetitions. Journalist Maureen Orth, who spent time with the couple, noted the difficulty of their public existence, the way strangers surrounded them constantly. When she mentioned this to Katie, Katie's response was not what she expected. She said quietly that they didn't go outside very much. Debbie Wooten, the journalist who had interviewed a teenage Katie for 17 magazine years earlier, encountered her again during these years and was shaken by the difference. The open, unguarded girl she had once spoken to had been replaced by someone more careful, more controlled, someone who seemed to be managing herself as much as she was presenting herself. Jenna Miscavige, the niece of Scientology's current leader David Miscavige, later spoke publicly about this period. She had grown up inside the organization and had experienced firsthand what prolonged immersion in its demands could do to a person's sense of self. She recognized something in Katie, not as a diagnosis, but as a kind of painful familiarity. She expressed support for what she believed Katie must have been quietly navigating, without access to the people and the freedom that most of us take for granted. And then, in June 2012, it ended. Katie filed for divorce in a way that suggested this had not been an impulsive decision. Her father, Martin Holmes, the practical Catholic lawyer from Ohio, who had worried about all of this from the beginning, had apparently been quietly preparing for this possibility for some time. He had negotiated a prenuptial agreement so thorough it filled 5 bankers' boxes. When the moment came, the legal machinery moved with a speed that caught everyone off guard, including Tom. The divorce was finalized within 11 days. 11 days. For a marriage to one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, with all the legal resources that implies, 11 days is extraordinary. It was not luck. It was preparation. Tom admitted later that he did not see it coming. He described being blindsided. He turned 50 shortly after the announcement and spoke about the way life can suddenly shift beneath your feet, about needing a sense of humor to survive it. He wore his wedding ring for a time even after the filing. And somewhere in those details was something genuinely human, a man who had perhaps convinced himself that everything was fine, that the performance of a marriage and a marriage itself were the same thing. Katie's first concern, her attorney made clear, was Suri. It was always going to be Suri. She was granted sole custody. This was not a minor legal footnote. In the language of family law, sole custody means one parent makes the decisions. It means that when questions arise about education, about health, about religion, there is one voice that matters. And the religion question, everyone understood, was the reason. In a deposition later, Tom Cruise was asked directly whether Katie Holmes had left him partly to protect Suri from Scientology. He found the question offensive, but he also confirmed that it was a reason Katie had given. His daughter, he clarified, was not practicing Scientology. Whether that was always the plan, or whether it became the plan, or whether it was something Katie had fought quietly for, without anyone fully realizing it, remains one of the many things in this story that lives just below the surface. The financial settlement drew attention for what it wasn't. Tom Cruise's net worth was estimated at around $600 million. Katie received $400,000 per year in child support, set to continue until Suri turned 18. Over the full period, that amounts to roughly $4.8 million. For a man of his wealth, in a city where divorce settlements regularly reshape fortunes, this was notably modest. But people who understood what had actually happened recognized the logic. Katie had traded money for control. She had accepted less so that the walls around Suri's life could be higher, so that the decisions made on her daughter's behalf would remain hers alone. They left for New York City, and something in Katie visibly changed. People who had watched her fade over the years of her marriage now watched something different. She looked lighter, not carefree, not performatively joyful, but genuinely present in a way she hadn't been in public for years. She threw herself into work on her own terms. She talked in interviews about putting herself out there, about being herself without apology, about the strange liberation of finally operating under her own authority. She dated quietly, carefully, within the boundaries of a clause in her divorce agreement that reportedly prohibited her from publicly introducing any romantic partner to Suri for 5 years. She complied. She was patient in ways that suggested she had learned the value of patience the hard way. Her relationship with Jamie Foxx, kept carefully private from 2013 to 2019, was eventually confirmed only after it had already ended. She described it later as something that helped her rediscover her independence and reminded her that she was allowed to build a life on her own terms. She said she didn't have a lot of rules for herself anymore, that she had stopped taking herself so seriously in the rigid, managed way she once had. And through all of it, there was Suri. The two of them built something in those New York years that people on the outside found genuinely moving to observe. A mother and daughter navigating an unusual life together, staying out of the spotlight not because they were hiding, but because they had decided that privacy was something worth choosing rather than something that had been chosen for them. They walked through the city like regular people. They went to school events and coffee shops and movie theaters. They dressed in ways that showed they were both paying attention to the world around them and not particularly interested in being watched. Tom Cruise's absence from this picture was rarely discussed in polite company, but it was constant. By almost every account, he had not been publicly seen with Suri since 2012, more than a decade without a confirmed appearance together. His older children from his adoption with Nicole Kidman, Connor and Isabella, had both remained inside Scientology and maintained relationships with their father. Isabella had married and built a quiet life in London as an artist. Connor had moved into music and DJing and had been spotted with Tom in London on at least one occasion. The pattern that emerged from comparing these relationships was uncomfortable but clear. The children who stayed within the church kept their father. The child raised outside it was, apparently, outside him too. Whether this was Tom's choice or the church's influence or some more complicated combination of both is something nobody outside that situation can say with certainty. But the years passed, and Suri grew up, and her father was not there. She graduated from high school in New York in June of the year she turned 18. It was a milestone. One of the moments that parents plan for, photograph, cry at, embarrass their children about. Katie was there. Tom was not. Instead, on the same weekend, he was photographed at the Eras Tour in a VIP section, laughing with Hugh Grant and Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. The contrast sat with people in a way that simple absence might not have. It wasn't just that he missed it. It was that he was visibly, publicly elsewhere, choosing something other. And then came April 18th, Suri's 18th birthday, the day the child support legally ended. The day she crossed the threshold into legal adulthood. The day, as it happened, that she had always quietly been moving toward. In the weeks surrounding her birthday, the news broke through Page 6 and spread quickly. Suri Cruise had changed her name. She was no longer using Cruise as her last name at all. She had adopted Noel, her mother's middle name, as her own. She was now Suri Noel. In that single quiet decision, made without a press release or an explanation or an interview, she communicated something that years of tabloid speculation had tried to articulate and failed. She communicated it simply, personally, and with a kind of dignity that made the loudness of everything around it feel beside the point. A source told Page 6 that Suri wanted her own identity, that she felt proud to carry a name connected to her mother. These are not the words of a teenager making an impulsive declaration. They are the words of someone who has thought carefully about who she is, where she comes from, what she wants to carry forward, and what she is ready to set down. She enrolled at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, one of the most respected academic institutions in the United States, with particular distinction in the arts and sciences. On her high school's decision day in June, she wore a Carnegie Mellon sweatshirt. The photograph spread quickly. People who had watched her entire life play out in the background of someone else's story stopped and noticed. She had made it. She was going somewhere, on her own terms, in her own direction, carrying a name that meant something to her. Katie was there to help her move in. Of course she was. There are photographs of the two of them, boxes and suitcases in hand, navigating the ordinary logistics of a college move-in day with the kind of ease that only comes from years of being genuinely in sync with each other. And then Katie drove back to New York and came home to an apartment that was suddenly quiet in a way it hadn't been in 18 years. Empty nest is a phrase that sounds almost trivial until you understand what fills the nest you're suddenly sitting alone in. For Katie Holmes, the 18 years of that nest included one of the most dramatic escapes in modern celebrity history, a complete reinvention of her identity, a decade plus of single motherhood in one of the most scrutinized cities on earth, and the daily work of giving her daughter a life that felt safe and loving and real. The quiet of that apartment must have carried more than most quiet apartments do. Suri came back to visit. She was photographed in New York during a trip from Pittsburgh, carrying her cat, walking through the city she had grown up in. She came to support Katie at the Broadway opening of a production Katie was involved in. And the two were seen together, easy and warm in the way that people are when they have earned their closeness the hard way. Katie shared a backstage photo from opening night that included her parents and sisters. It was a picture of a family, a real one, the kind that holds through everything. What Tom Cruise made of all of this is something only he knows. He has spoken in interviews over the years about his love for all of his children, including Suri. Unnamed sources have told entertainment outlets that he hopes someday to rebuild the relationship. These are the words of someone who understands, on some level, that something has been lost. Whether he understands why, or whether the framework he lives inside makes that kind of understanding possible, is a question that hovers over the whole story without a clean answer. He is preparing, as of this writing, for the next mission, Impossible Film, and has spoken publicly about an even more extraordinary ambition: filming a movie in space, working with NASA and SpaceX, potentially conducting a spacewalk. He is still chasing the impossible, still reaching for the next extraordinary thing. And Suri is starting college. There is something quietly devastating about that juxtaposition. A father whose life is structured around the spectacular, and a daughter who simply wants to be a person, to have a name that means something to her, to build something of her own without the weight of someone else's mythology attached to it. She sang on 2 of her mother's films, a cover of Blue Moon in Alone Together and a vocal contribution in Rare Objects. Katie has spoken about those collaborations with a kind of reverence that has nothing to do with the industry and everything to do with the specific miracle of watching your child become someone. She said she hopes Suri always does something on her films, that including her created a safe, beautiful, creative space, that having her there was very meaningful, because she's my heart. My heart. 2 words. The whole story in 2 words. This is not a story about Tom Cruise, not really. It was never quite that. It's a story about a girl born into extraordinary circumstances, born into silence by decree, born into a world that had already decided who she was before she could speak a word of it. It's the story of what happens when that girl grows up, when she reaches an age at which no court order, no settlement clause, no institutional pressure can tell her who she belongs to anymore. When she gets to decide, she decided. The name on the door of her college dorm room does not say Cruise. It says Noel. And in that small, irreversible fact lives everything the story has been building toward for 18 years. Katie Holmes raised a daughter who knows who she is, who has the quiet confidence to make a declaration without drama, who can step into a new chapter of her life carrying only what she chose to carry, who can walk away from a name that the whole world recognized and replace it with one that means something true. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. And somewhere in Pittsburgh, a young woman named Suri Noel is beginning to figure out what comes next. What she wants to study, who she wants to become, what kind of life she wants to build in rooms her mother did not arrange, and with people who do not know the full weight of where she came from. She will be fine. More than fine. She will be herself, fully, finally, without asterisk or qualification, without a famous last name demanding context she didn't ask for. Her mother watched her walk into that building and then drove home alone through a city that has been kind to both of them. And the world, for once, had nothing complicated to say. Just this: she made it. She really made it.